Hey guys, welcome back. This is the third preference to Chapter 4 in Rudolph Steiner's Occult Science. Just to go over what we read the last video. Basically, the Earth evolution has four stages: Saturn, Sun, Moon, and Earth. And within them, it took development of the human body, development of the life body, astral body, and in preparation for all these evolutions for the human ego, the I. So now we're going to continue on, and here we go. If we wish to form an approximately accurate pictorial idea of the conditions during the Saturn evolution, we must take in consideration the fact that during that period essentially nothing existed of the things and creatures that belong to the present Earth, and are counted among the mineral, plant, and animal kingdoms. The beings of these three kingdoms only came into existence in later periods of evolution. Of the present, physically visible Earth beings, only man existed at this time, and only the part of him, the physical body, as already described. At the present time, not only do these beings of mineral, plant, animal, and human kingdoms belong to the Earth, but there are also other beings who do not manifest in a physical body. These beings were also present during the Saturn evolution, and their activity on Saturn as a sphere of action resulted in a subsequent evolution of man. If one directs the spiritual organs of perception, not to the beginning and the end, but to the middle evolutionary period of this Saturn incarnation, a state appears consisting chiefly of heat. No gaseous, fluid, or solid elements are to be found here, but just this heat. All these conditions only appear in later cosmic incarnations. Let us imagine a human being with this present sense organs approaching this Saturn world as an observer. He would then experience none of the sense impressions of which he is capable, except the sensation of heat. On reaching the space occupied by Saturn, he would only perceive that it had a condition of heat different from the rest of the surrounding space. He would not find this space uniformly warm throughout, but would find hot and cold regions alternating in the most varied manner. Heat would be perceived radiating according to certain lines, not straight lines, but in irregular forms, produced by the variations in heat. He would have before him something like an organized cosmic being appearing in ever-changing states, consisting only of heat. For man of the present day, it must be difficult to imagine something that consists only of heat, since he is not accustomed to recognize heat as something in itself, but to perceive it only in connection with hot or cold gaseous, fluid, or solid bodies. Especially the man who has acquired the ideas of modern physics will look upon the above way of speaking about heat as pure nonsense. He will perhaps say that there are solid, fluid, and gaseous bodies. Heat, however, denotes only the condition in which any of these three bodily forms find itself. When the smallest particles of gas are in motion, this motion is perceived as heat. Where there is no gas, there can be no such motion, therefore also no heat. The matter appears quite different to the researcher in spiritual science. For him, heat is something about which he can speak in the same sense he can speak of a gas, or of fluid, or of a solid body. It is for him only a substance still finer than gas, and gas is to him nothing else than condensed heat, in the same sense that a fluid is condensed vapor, or a solid body a condensed fluid. Thus the spiritual scientist speaks of heat bodies, just as he speaks of gaseous and vaporous bodies. If someone wishes to follow the spiritual researcher into this realm, it is only necessary to grant that there exists spiritual perception. In the given world of the spiritual senses, of the physical senses, heat exists entirely as a state of solid, a fluid, or a gaseous body. This condition, however, is only the external aspect of heat, or its effect. The physicists speak only of this effect of heat, not of its inner nature. Let us try to disregard all effects of heat that we receive through the external objects and picture to ourselves only the inner nature when we say, I feel warm or I feel cold. This inner experience alone gives us an idea of the Saturn state at the period of development described above. It would have been possible to pass through the whole of the space occupied by Saturn without finding any sort of gas that would exert pressure or any sort of solid or fluid body from which we could receive an impression of light. But in every point in space, without any impression from outside, we would have had the inner feeling that there exists this or that degree of heat. In a cosmic body of such a character, there are no conditions suitable for such the animals, plants, and the minerals of the present time. It is therefore hardly necessary to state that what has just been described could never occur. A man of today, as such, cannot confront ancient Saturn as an observer. The exposition was only to serve as an illustration. The beings of whom supersensible cognition becomes conscious while observing Saturn were at a stage of evolution quite different from the present. Sensorily perceptible Earth beings. Before this faculty of cognition begins appear, who do not possess a physical body like that of the present-day man. When we speak here of a physical body, we must be careful not to think of the physical corporeality as exists today. Rather, we must differentiate carefully between the physical body and the mineral body. A physical body and one that is ruled by the physical laws observed today in the mineral kingdom. The present human physical body is not only ruled by these physical laws, but is also permeated by mineral substance. It is impossible to speak of physical mineral body of this kind on ancient Saturn. At that time there exists only a physical corporeality, governed by physical laws. But these physical laws manifested themselves only through heat effects. Thus, the physical body was a fine, attuned, etheric heat body, and the whole of Saturn consisted of these heat bodies. They were the first germinal beings of the present physical mineral body of man. The latter fashioned itself out of the heat body as a result of the insertion into a gaseous fluid and a solid matter, which only came into existence later on. Among the beings perceived by supersensible consciousness when it becomes aware of the Saturn state, and who, besides man, may be called inhabitants of Saturn, are those, for example, who have no need at all of a physical body. The lowest vehicle of these beings was an ether body. They had, however, besides this, a higher member that transcends all human vehicles. Man has a highest member, spirit man. These beings have a still higher member, and between the etheric body and spirit man, they have all the members described in this book as belonging also to human beings: astral body, ego, spirit, self, and life spirit. Just as our earth is surrounded by a sphere of air, an atmosphere, so it was also on Saturn. Only this atmosphere was a spiritual character. It consisted of beings. This is very interesting. Okay, so let's rewind a little bit. So he says that our present Earth, our atmosphere is basically air that human beings breathe. Now, human beings of a prior like the beginning human being, wasn't surrounded by air. That's mineral, gas. There were no minerals and gases at that time. It was just heat. And there was a spiritual character. Man was consisted of spiritual beings. Between the heat bodies of Saturn and these beings, there was a constant reciprocal action. The latter submerged the members of their beings into the physical heat bodies of Saturn, and through there was no life in these heat bodies themselves. The life of the beings in their environment was expressed in them. They might be compared to mirrors, only it was not the images of the beings in question that were mirrored, but their life conditions. Nothing living could have been discovered on Saturn itself, but through its activities, Saturn visualized the surrounding heavenly space by reflecting back like an echo the life sent down to it. The whole of Saturn appeared like a mirror of celestial life. Certain exalted beings whose life was radiated back by Saturn may be called spirits of wisdom. And in brackets we have, in Christian esotericism, they bear the name Cryotetes or dominions. And let me spell out this Cryotetes. Sorry. It's a K-Y-R-I-O-T-E-T-E-S. So that's a very Greek name. In other words, dominions. So basically, it says certain exalted beings whose life was radiated back by Saturn, basically by old Earth, may be called spirits of wisdom. Their activity on Saturn does not begin with the middle period of its evolution, just described. In fact, it already ceased. Before they reached the ability to become conscious of this reflection, the reflection of spirits of wisdom and that of the beings on Saturn, from the heat bodies of Saturn, they had to develop these bodies to the point of being able to affect this reflection. Therefore, their activity began soon after the beginning of the Saturn evolution. At the time, the bodily nature of Saturn still consisted of chaotic substance that was unable to reflect anything. By considering this chaotic substance, one has transplanted oneself through spiritual perception to the beginning of Saturn evolution. What is observable there does not yet bear the subsequent heat character. If we wish to characterize it, it is only possible to speak of the quality that may be compared with the human will. It is will, through and through. Thus we have to do here entirely with a soul state. If we wish to trace back the source of this will, we find that it originates from the emanations of exalted beings, who brought their development in stages that can only be divined to such a height that they were able, when the evolution of Saturn began, to pour forth the will from their own beings onto the beings of Saturn. You could say this heat interaction between exalted spiritual beings and human beings is the early basis of human will and willpower. So this early Saturn stage is a development of willpower, the human will, and it's a culmination of exalted spiritual beings reflecting their likeness. Remember, there's a reflection of these beings with our human soul, and that substance, or basically that reaction of their spiritual beings emanating with us, is creating human will. This is the early evolution of human will. Unfucking believable. Well, according to Senor Rudolph Steiner. So where the fuck was I, Mr. Human Will? There we go. After this emanation had lasted for a time, the activity of the already mentioned spirits of wisdom unites with the will. Thus, will, previously wholly without attributes, now gradually acquires the ability to reflect life back into the cosmic space. These beings who experience their supreme bliss is pouring forth will out of themselves at the beginning of the Saturn evolution, and may be called the spirits of will. In Christian esotericism, they are called thrones. These are the thrones of God. After a certain stage of the Saturn evolution has been reached through the cooperation of will and life. Okay, bud. There begins the activity of other beings who are likewise present in the environment of Saturn. They may be called the spirits of motion. In esoteric Christianity, it's called dynamicists or powers. They have no physical or ether body, but their lowest vehicle is the astral body, the pleasures and pains. So these powers in Christian esotericism move through pleasure and pain. When the Saturn bodies have acquired the ability to reflect life, this reflected life is in a condition to be permeated with the qualities that reside in the astral bodies of the spirits of motion. The result of this is that it appears as though the manifestations of the sensation and feeling and the similar soul activities were flung out into celestial space from Saturn. The whole of Saturn appears like an ensouled being, manifesting symphonies and antitheses. These manifestations of soul qualities, however, are in no way its own, but only the flung back soul activities of the spirits of motion. So let's go back to what the fuck the spirit. This is getting very complicated because there's certain aspects of divine will being poured into human beings. Yes. I was trying to say in the other. Oh, yes. This is basically, spiritual beings being involved in the creation of man. Alright. So after this state has lasted a certain length of time, there begins the activity of still other beings that may be called the spirits of form. Their lowest member is also an astral body, pleasure and pain, but it stands at the stage of development different from the spirits of motion. Whereas these later communicate only general expressions of feeling to the reflected life, the activity of the astral body of the spirits of form. In Christian exotericism, it's called exousiae, or authorities, is of such a nature that expressions of feeling are flung back into cosmic space as though from individual beings. One might say that the spirits of motion cause Saturn as a whole to appear like an ensouled being. So earliest Earth conditions look like an ensouled. Basically, if everyone's played like Final Fantasy III, it looks like a fucking Esper. Or a transformed spiritual something. That's what early Earth looks like. It's called Saturn. The early Earth condition is called Saturn. And in early Earth condition, angelic beings are comprising the human will. Okay? Alright, so let's get back to this shit here. The spirits of form divide this life into individual living beings, so that Saturn now appears like an agglomeration of such soul beings. In order to have a picture of this state, imagine a mulberry or a blackberry, and note how it composed of small individual parts. For the observer of the spiritual world, Saturn in the period of evolution just described is similarly composed of a number of Saturn entities that, to be sure, do not possess a life and soul of their own, but that reflect the life and soul of beings dwelling in them. So basically, the spirits of form work upon Saturn. And Saturn now is like basically it's kind of like an egg, but it looks like just a spiritual shining egg, and now the spirits of form work upon the egg, and it makes kind of like you said, like a blackberry shape. What it's making is individual consciousness. The spirits of form, let's read this again. The spirits of form divide this life into individual living beings, so that the Saturn now appears like a culmination, like a blackberry, and know how it is composed of small individual parts. For the observer of the spiritual world, Saturn in the period of evolution just described is similarly composed of a number of Saturn entities that, to be sure, do not possess a life and soul of their own, but that reflect the life and soul of beings dwelling in them. So that these little pods reflect kind of like the seed of life. They don't reflect beings, but like a seed. In this state of Saturn, beings now intervene who likewise have the astral body as their lowest member, but who have developed it into such stage that it has the effect of present-day human ego. Through these beings, the ego looks down upon Saturn from its environment and communicates its nature to the individual living beings of Saturn. Remember those little pods. So let's read this again. In this state of Saturn, beings now intervene, who likewise have the astral body as their lowest member, pleasure and pain, but who have developed it to such a stage that it has the effect of a present-day human ego. So there's basically spiritual beings that resemble present-day human beings, like a present-day human ego. And that these spiritual beings, even though they resembled present-day human egos, they existed in this primordial Earth Saturn state. Okay? And it says that though these beings, the ego looks down upon Saturn from its environment and communicates its nature to the individual living beings of Saturn. So it's like these entities with kind of human egos are looking down on this embryo of Earth and pouring its knowledge into it. Thus, something is sent out into the cosmic space from Saturn that appears similar to the activity of the human personality in the present cycle of life. The beings who bring this about may be called the spirits of personality, archai, the primal beings in Christian esotericism. They confer upon the small Saturn bodies the appearance of the characteristics of personality. Personality does not exist on Saturn itself, however, but only in its reflection, as it were, the shell of personality. The spirits of personality have their real personality on the sphere, on the periphery of Saturn. Just because these spirits of personality let their being be reflected back by the Saturn bodies in the manner indicated, the fine substance just described as heat is imparted to the latter. In the whole of Saturn there is no inner life, but the spirits of personality recognize the image of their own inner life as it streams back to them from Saturn in the form of heat. When all this occurs, the spirits of personality stand at the stage at which the human being is at present. And that time that they pass through their human epoch, if we wish to look at these facts with an unprejudiced eye, we must imagine that a being can be man, not merely in the form born by man at the present time. The spirits of personality are human beings on Saturn. They do not have the physical body as their lowest principle, but the astral body with the ego. Therefore, they are not able to express the experiences of the astral body in a physical and ether body like that of the present-day man. Yet they not only possess an ego and are fully aware of it, because of the heat substances of Saturn brings it to their consciousness, it reflects it back to them. They are human beings under conditions different from that of Earth state. In the further course of the Saturn evolution, events ensure that are different in character from anything existing heretofore. While up to the present time everything was a reflection of external life and sensation, now a kind of inner life begins. Here and there within and Saturn world a life of light begins, now flaring up, now darkening, flickering, glimmering of light appearing in certain places, and in others something occurs like flashes of lightning. The Saturn heat bodies begin to glimmer, to sparkle, even to radiate. Because this stage of evolution has been reached, again, certain beings have the possibility of becoming active. There are beings who may be called spirits of fire in Christian esotericism, archangeloi or archangels. Although these beings have an astral body of their own, they are unable at this stage of their existence to stimulate it. They would not be able to awake any feeling or sensation if they could not work upon the heat bodies that had reached the Saturn stage already described. This activity exerted by them gives them the possibility of becoming aware of their own existence. They cannot say to themselves, "I exist," but rather, "My environment permits me to exist." They perceive, and their perceptions consist in the activities light described as taking place on Saturn, with just heat radiating back and forth from their environment to their being. Therefore, that's why they say, "I cannot exist, but my environment permits me to exist." These activities are in a certain sense of their ego. This gives them a certain kind of consciousness that may be designated as a picture consciousness. It can be thought of as a kind of human dream consciousness. Only we must think of the degree of intensity of this dream consciousness as being much greater than in the human dreaming. Yes, these archangeloi, and we must realize that we are concerned not only with unreal human dream pictures surging up and down, but with the dream pictures that have actual relationship to the play of light on Saturn. Within this reciprocal activity taking place between the spirits of fire and the Saturn heat bodies, the germinal human organs sense are started on the path of evolution. The organs through which the human being at present perceives the physical world flash up in their first etheric inceptions. Human phantoms, as yet manifesting nothing but primal light images of the sense organs, can be recognized within Saturn by means of clairvoyant perception. These sense organs thus are the fruit of the activity of the spirits of fire. But the spirits of fire are not the only beings who participate in the formation of these organs. Together with the spirits of fire, other beings enter the field of Saturn. Beings who are so far advanced in their evolution as to be able to employ these germinal senses to perceive the cosmic presence taking place in the life of Saturn. These beings may be called spirits of love. In Christian esotericism, the seraphim. So the seraphim are the spirits of love. And they are far advanced beings. And together with the beings of fire, they work in the evolution to employ our 5 physical senses. Were they not present, the spirits of fire would not have the consciousness described above. They would behold the Saturn process of consciousness, enabling them to convey these processes of the spirits of fire in the form of images. They forego all benefit they themselves might reap by perceiving the Saturn events. They renounce all enjoyment, all pleasure. They sacrifice all this in order that the spirits of fire might have it. So a new Saturn period follows these occurrences. Something else is added to the play of light. It may seem madness to many when we speak that here presents itself to supersensible cognition. The interior of Saturn appears like a billowing and surging of sensations of taste, sweet, bitter, sour, may be observed as various points within Saturn, within Earth itself, outwardly into cosmic space. All this appears as tone, as a kind of music. Within these processes, certain beings again find the possibility of developing an activity upon Saturn. Remember, the vibrations, these entities are vibrating, creating the physical body itself, manifesting the organs to perceive these spiritual beings, these spiritual beings fashion the ear, for example, but it's their vibration which creates our material existence of the organ of the ear. See, spiritual beings of form went to create and fashion the 5 physical senses. And the 5 physical senses went to fashion the physical body. See, in order to perceive sound, you have to have an origin for sound. And that's what these spiritual beings are. So in order to perceive what we perceive as sound and ideas, they are actually spiritual beings, and these spiritual beings fashioned our human bodies. Okay, so where are we here? Okay, well, here we go. We'll start at the top here. The interior of Saturn appears like a billowing and surging sensations of taste. Remember, within all vibrations, we also have the sensations of taste: sweet, bitter, sour. All of these are given to us, and they also appear as tones, different sounds, vibrations, and music. Within these processes, certain beings again find the possibility of developing an activity upon Saturn. They may be called the spirits of twilight. These beings may be called the sons of twilight or life. In Christian esotericism, they're referred to as angeloi or angels. So now the angels get to work upon them, upon the human being in the Saturn state. They enter into reciprocal activity with the surging forces of taste present within Saturn, and through it, their ether or life body takes on an activity of somewhat similar to metabolism. So they're able to process energy. They bring life into the interior of Saturn. As a result, processes of nutrition and elimination take place. So the angels are apparently intimately related to the processes of elimination, since they went into fashion that aspect of life in the Saturn stage of Earth development. They do not directly produce these processes, but through their activity, the process indirectly come into existence. This internal life makes it possible for still another being to enter the sphere of this cosmic body. Beings who may be designated spirits of harmony. In Christian esotericism, the cherubim. They bestow upon the sons of life a dull kind of consciousness, duller and vaguer than the dream consciousness of the present-day human being, a consciousness similar to that he possesses in dreamless sleep. This consciousness is of such a low order that man is not aware of it. It is present, however, and differs from day consciousness in degree and also in kind. Plant life at present also has this dreamless sleep consciousness. Even though this consciousness does not excite perceptions of an outer world as they are understood today, nevertheless, it regulates the life processes and brings them into harmony with the outer cosmic processes. At the Saturn stage under consideration, the sons of life cannot perceive this regulating process. The spirits of harmony, however, perceive it and are therefore the actual regulators. All this life activity takes place in the human phantoms already characterized. The phantoms therefore appear to spiritual perception as through endowed with life, but their life is only semblance. It is actually the life of the sons of life. These sons of life make use of the human phantoms in order, as it were, to unfold themselves. So they use the human template to unfold their own being, and that is the cherubim, or this dulled state of consciousness. You could say when you sleep and you don't have a dream, that's just dulled state of consciousness. Now let us consider these human phantoms with their semblance of life. During the Saturn period described, these phantoms have ever-changing forms, sometimes resembling the shape, sometimes that. During this further course of evolution, these forms become more defined. Occasionally they become permanent. The reason for this is that they are now permeated by the activities of the spirits who have to be taken into account already at the beginning of Saturn evolution, namely the spirits of will, thrones. As a result, the human phantom itself appears with the simplest, dullest form of consciousness. We must picture this form of consciousness as duller than that of the dreamless sleep. Under present conditions, the minerals have this consciousness. It brings the inner being into harmony with the outer physical world. Upon Saturn, the spirits of will are the regulators of this harmony, and the human being appears like a small counterpart of the life of Saturn itself. What constitutes the Saturn life on a large scale constitutes man at this stage on a small scale. This is primary nucleus of what even in the modern human being exists only in a germinal state, namely spirit man, Atma. Within Saturn, this dull human will manifests itself to supersensible perception through the effects that may be compared with scents or odors. Toward the outside, toward the celestial space, something is to be perceived like the manifestation of a personality that is, however, not controlled by an inner ego, but is regulated from without like a machine. The regulators are the spirits of will. If we survey the preceding descriptions, it becomes apparent that, starting from the middle stage of Saturn evolution, described at the very beginning, the stages of this evolution might be characterized by comparing their various effects with sense impressions of the present. It was said that Saturn evolution manifests as heat. Then a play of light begins, followed by a play of taste and tone. Finally, something arises that manifests within the interior of Saturn, like the sensation of smell, and externally, like a mechanically acting human ego. So this is the early rudiments of habit, because he talks about a mechanically acting human ego. So even at this early developing stage of existence, there was the earliest forms of habit. One might ask that the manifestations of Saturn evolution prior to this state of heat are: what existed before cannot in any way be compared with anything that is accessible to an outer sense impression. Prior to the state of heat, a state existed that the human being can experience at the present time only in his inner nature. If he gives himself up to the ideas that he himself forms in his soul without the impelling impulse of an external impression, he has something within himself that physical senses cannot perceive. On the contrary, it is only accessible to higher perception. The manifestations that precede the state of heat of Saturn can be present only for him who possesses supersensible perception. Three such states may be mentioned: pure soul heat, which is outwardly imperceptible; pure spiritual light, which is external darkness, finally a spiritual state of being that is complete within itself and needs no external being in order to become conscious of itself. Pure inner heat accompanies the appearance of spirits of motion. Pure spiritual light, that of the spirits of wisdom, pure inner being is bound up with the first emanation of the spirits of will. With the appearance of Saturn heat, our evolution of the first time passes over from a purely spiritual inner existence into one manifesting externally. So basically the whole sum up of this Saturn evolution, you could say, is a partly inner earth experience. It is just an inner experience. It's developing the inner will, developing the personality, developing the taste, developing the smell, and certain angelic beings go to work on, again, the metabolism. The angels are involved with that. So certain beings, you could say, in God's order, go to make up and comprise this early form of a human being, and it's just purely spiritual. It has a physical body, but it doesn't really comprise the other three bodies. Oh, where the hell am I here? With the appearance of the Saturn heat, our evolution for the first time passes over from a purely spiritual inner existence into the manifesting externally. It will be especially difficult for the present-day consciousness to accept that the statement that the Saturn state of heat, what is called time, first makes its appearance, for the preceding states are not at all temporal. They belong to the region that in spiritual science may be called duration. For this reason, it must be understood that in all that is said in this work about such states in the region of duration, expressions referring to temporal relationships are only used by ways of comparison and explanation. So there's no time did not exist before this Saturn stage. Time was an inception, and as it says here, that with the Saturn state of heat, what is called time first makes its appearance. For that the preceding states, the Sun, Moon, and Earth states, are not temporal. They belong to something called duration. So these other preceding evolutionary states, like even of the Earth, our present-day Earth, is going through a duration in time. So time was a inception in this early heat phase of Earth evolution, which is called Saturn. Time began there, and these other evolutions like Earth, Moon, and Sun are just called durations in time. For this reason, it must be understood that it is said that this work. Let me. I was getting ahead of myself there. For this reason, it must be understood that in all that is said in this work about such states in the region of duration, expressions referring to temporal relationships are only used in the way of comparison and explanation. What precedes time, as it were, can only be characterized in human language by expressions containing the idea of time. For we must also be conscious of the fact that although the first, second, and third states of Saturn did not take place one after the other in the present sense of the word, we cannot do otherwise than describe them one after the other. Indeed, in spite of their duration or simultaneity or spontaneity, they are so interdependent that this dependence may be compared with a sequence in time. By thus pointing to these earliest evolutionary states of Saturn, light is also thrown upon all other questions about the whence of these stages, like when it happened. From the purely intellectual standpoint, and it's naturally quite possible in regard to any origin to continue asking about the origin of this origin. But this is not permissible in the fact of facts. We need not make this clear by comparison. If we find traces in a road, we may ask what has caused them. The answer may be a wagon. We can ask further, when came the wagon and where has it gone? An answer found upon facts is again possible. We might then ask further, who was sitting in it? What was the intention of the person who was using it? What was he doing? Finally, whoever, we shall come to the point where the question through the very facts comes to an end. Whoever continues to question deviates from the original intention of the question. So it's basically like asking, again, what came first, the chicken or the egg? He's bringing us really close to the origins of creation here, according to occult science. And basically what he's trying to say is, if you keep going back, there's no other answers. He doesn't have another answer. The question must stop somewhere. So that's what he's trying to say here too. That's what this whole paragraph is about. Is the question has to stop. But in respect of the great questions of the cosmos, this is not so clearly seen. By really exact observation, however, we shall notice that all questions concerning the when must end at the above described Saturn states. For we have come to a sphere in which the beings and processes no longer justify themselves through their origin, but through themselves. The results of Saturn evolution is the development of the human germ to a certain stage. It has reached that low, dim consciousness spoke of above. It must not imagine that the latter development begins only in the later stages of Saturn. The spirits of will are active throughout all conditions of Saturn. But to supersensible perception, the result in the last stage is most conspicuous. There exists no definite boundary line between the activities of the individual groups of beings. If it is said that the beginning of the spirits of will are active, then the spirits of wisdom, then another group of spiritual beings, then it is not intended to mean that they are not only active at that time, they are active throughout the whole of the Saturn evolution. But in the periods mentioned, their activity can be best observed. See, these beings that he's describing, see, like the origins of the will spirit, where did they come from? See, they were already in existence, and they lended themselves to create this. So that's why it's hard to have an origin question be answered. He can only give you as far back as when creation first began its inception, which is what science has with its Big Bang. They can only go so far back. Thus, the whole of Saturn evolution appears like a fashioning, a working over what has streamed out of spirits of will by the spirits of wisdom, motion, form, and so forth. At the same time, these spiritual beings themselves undergo an evolution. For an example, after having received their life reflecting back to them from Saturn, the spirits of wisdoms, remember, all of these spiritual beings that went in to pour their own being into Saturn, they have that reflected back to them, and that reflection evolves these spiritual beings. And this evolution, for example, having received their life reflected back to them from Saturn, the spirits of wisdom stand at a different stage from that which they previously stood. The fruit of this activity enhances the capacities of their own being. The result is that after the completion of such activity, something happens to them similar to what happens to man in sleep. After their periods of activity on Saturn follow other periods during which they live, so to speak, in other worlds. Their activity is then turned away from Saturn. Therefore, clairvoyant perception observes in the described evolution of Saturn, an ancient and an ascent and a descent. The ascent continues until the formation of the state of heat. Then with the play of light and ebb, tides set in. And when the human phantoms have assumed a form through the activity of the spirits of will, the spiritual beings have gradually withdrawn. The Saturn evolution slowly dies, and as such disappears. A period of rest occurs. The germinal human being passes over into a condition of dissolution. Not, however, one in which it entirely disappears, but one that is similar to that of a plant seed resting in the earth, preparing to grow into a new plant. In a similar manner, the human germ rests in the bosom of the cosmos, awaiting to seek new awakening. And when the moment of this awakening comes, the above described spiritual beings have acquired under other conditions capacities for working further upon the germinal human being. So the idea here is that these spiritual beings went to create man, and they reflected their nature upon early Earth, which is called Saturn. And their being, when they poured forth, reflected back to themselves. And that reflection caused these spiritual beings to recede or sleep. And the same thing with man. Man went into a receding or a sleep. And when these spiritual beings awoken, or when they're coming back to a new awakening, they acquired new capacities. It's like when you work out and you go to sleep and you wake up a little bit stronger. That's what happened here. An evolution of forces, all because of a pouring out and a return and a sleep. The spirits of wisdom have acquired the capacity in their ether bodies not only of enjoying the reflection of life, as they did on Saturn, but also the ability of letting life stream forth from themselves and of endowing other beings with it. The spirits of motion are now as far advanced as were the spirits of wisdom on Saturn. The lowest principle of their being was then the astral body. Now they possess an ether or life body. The other spiritual beings have correspondingly advanced to higher stage of their evolution. All these spiritual beings, therefore, are able to work upon further evolution of the germinal human being in another way than on Saturn. But at the end of Saturn's evolution, the germinal human being was dissolved. In order that the more evolved spiritual beings may continue from the point where they ended their previous activities, this germinal human being was briefly to come back together the stages through which it passed on Saturn. Sorry. This is to be seen by supersensible perception. The germinal human being emerges from its concealment, and through the forces that have been implanted within it on Saturn, it begins to develop through its own power. Sorry, I need a sip of adult juice. Need some coffee. Almost done here. I think, yes, this is the last preference here, actually. Good. So basically it's saying that now we're ending the Saturn evolution stage. And I'll finish off the last paragraph here. In order that the more evolved spiritual beings may continue from the point where they ended their previous activities, this germinal human being has briefly to come together the stages through which it passed on Saturn. This is to be seen by supersensible perception. The germinal human being emerges from its concealment, and through the forces that have been implanted within it on Saturn by these spiritual beings, it begins to develop through its own power. See, it emerges out of the darkness as a being of will. It advances itself as a being possessed of a semblance of life, a soul-like nature and other characteristics, until it reaches the stage of automatic manifestation of personality that it possessed at the end of the Saturn evolution. And that's the end of that preference. So we'll go over this again. This is pretty huge. Basically, the earliest evolution of the Earth is called Saturn. And man possessed a physical body, but spiritual beings fashioned his consciousness, basically. There's beings of will, beings of force, beings of taste, sense, smell. All of, you could say, God's kingdom went to fashion man. That's what has been discerned in spiritual consciousness. Again, we'll go over this one more time. Spiritual beings went to fashion man's 5 physical senses at the earliest stages of Earth's evolution, which is called Saturn. So in the Saturn beings, basically, they're spiritual beings that poured forth their own nature onto the early Earth. How can I put it this way? It's like you're an artist and you're drawing a picture. Now, imagine you're the artist. You're the angelic being here, and the picture is basically the early Earth, and you're pouring forth all your characteristics, all your artistic qualities onto this canvas, and it makes a picture. That's what these spiritual beings are kind of doing to man, to early man, to fashion his body. Not only that, but to fashion his consciousness. It takes certain beings to do this, and like an artist, as they're pouring out their artistic skill, the artist is gaining skill back. See, these angelic or these spiritual beings, they were pouring forth their being out to Saturn, out to early Earth, and it was reflecting itself back. It's a weird quality how we have that even in our conscious state of reflection. And that reflection is the earliest form of heat. And reflection was actually created by angelic beings. So if you're able to reflect on your soul, it is because of this early angelic activity informing our individual consciousness. The only reason why you could reflect on your soul is because of early angelic beings fashioning your consciousness. And basically, after the artist kind of draws his picture, he gains more skills. And that's what it goes into the second part of this, the sun evolution. And the sun stage goes into how now these spiritual beings with advanced awareness of themselves go to fashion further the human instrument. So at this early stage of the Saturn stage, the last part of the Saturn Earth evolution is the early part of the human will. See, it says that the forces that were implanted within Saturn, see, there is a force, the human being, it begins to develop through its own power. It emerges out of the darkness as a being of will. It advances itself being possessed a semblance of life, a soul-like nature with other characteristics. See, this is the early fashioning of consciousness. It has an automatic manifestation of a personality, but yet it doesn't have a self-awareness. This is what that final stage of Saturn evolution was like for the human being. basically that Saturn stage fashioned the early human will and basically your basic personalities. You know how people, the automatic, how people kind of just fucking like they act like they don't even try or something like that. They're not putting their life into their own self, and they're being autonomous, if you will. That's what the earliest human being was out of the Saturn evolution. And that was the last preface, so now we're going to enter the Sun evolution. So remember, out of all this evolution here, there's 4 evolutions of Earth. Saturn is the first, Sun is the second, Moon is the third, and Earth, what we have now, is the final incarnation of what we know as the human being. So this is the first incarnation of what we know as the human being in the Saturn stage, and it just developed the will, the early forms of personality, taste, and other sensations as well. So again, thank you guys for another read. I'm going to be doing as much as I can with this chapter alone. It's a very, very big chapter, like I said, and not even halfway into the chapter, actually. There's still quite a little bit left. So thank you guys again. Take care, everybody.